It's time now for our third panel of the day, focusing on the High Seas Treaty, which is formerly known, of course, as the Agreement on Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction. The third UN Ocean Conference that was held in Nice last year, right after the first edition of the BEF, accelerated the signing process of the BBNJ Treaty, which finally came into force after being ratified by over 60 signatories at the end of last year. Now, as most of you know, this landmark agreement provides a framework for the common governance of about half of our planet's surface and 95% of the ocean's volume, representing the largest habitat of our planet. But of course, deciding on a framework is one thing, and then solidifying and implementing that framework is quite another. So now we're going to hear from 4 experts on the best ways to try and do just that. Would you please welcome with me first Dr. Gretel Aguilar, Director General of the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, IUCN, Christian Teleki, CEO of the NGO Fauna and Flora International, Dr. Harriet Harden-Davies, Director of the Nippon Foundation, University of Edinburgh Ocean Voices Program, and Torsten Thiele, Founder and Executive Director of the Global Ocean Trust. Welcome to all 4 of you. So we are going to have time for some questions as well with this panel at the end. So go ahead and use Slido just like you did last time, or you can scan it here. Start thinking of your questions as we're starting the panel, and feel free to send them on in. So Gretel, hello. Let me start with you. You're the CEO of the IUCN. You've been with that organization over 20 years, developing and applying environmental law and policy in collaboration with governments and civil society. Now, the implementation of the BBNJ Treaty still requires this institutional framework to be set up in order for it to be operational. Can you give the audience an overview of the different elements of what this framework is? It should be on.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, put it close to your chin.
First of all, good afternoon. And thank you for the question. Let's first remind ourselves, what are we talking about here? We're talking about nearly half of the planet. This is what we're talking about. And you started this session explaining that. So imagine that for us human beings to get our act together and try to put some regulations around that half of the planet took us more than 20 years. Now we are celebrating, we are very happy that the agreement entered into force last January. But some of us, we are happy, of course, 20 years of working and trying to get the agreement. But now the question is, now what? Now what? We need to keep trying to get countries into the agreement because we only have 89 ratifications. And we are 195 countries around the planet. So this is not the end. Mm-hmm. We are in the middle. If we are really thinking that this is a common place for humanity, then we have to have all countries on board. That's the first thing that I would like to highlight. The second is, okay, how are we going to implement this? The agreement talks about, like any other agreement, to have a conference of the party. Soon we will have the first meeting of the conference of the parties, and that will be essential. So it will be the first time that the state members of the agreement will meet and will talk about what is next. But for that to function, we need 3 special things to happen. First, the parties will have to put a scientific and technical body together. For what? Because we need science. We need science, and we need the countries to base their decisions on science and cooperation. Then we have to have a financial mechanism. And now all conventions talk about financial mechanisms. But what is important is who and how we're going to get the money to run this operation. And this is not a rhetorical question. It's a very essential question. This is not about my territory or your territory. This is about a global common. And so who and how is going to put the money is still a big question. Right. And third, the clearinghouse mechanism. That is the mechanism, the platform where we're going to put information, where countries are going to share ideas, capacity building, etc. So these three things need to be in place so that we can function well as an agreement. But imagine, just put in your minds, this half of the planet, and we are saying that we all have, let's say, an interest. We all have a piece of this half of the planet. So to get together as countries, and I'm not just referring about governments, which of course are the ones leading, but about humanity, to manage that part of the world is so essential. So cooperation has to be on the table. I normally think about, okay, this will be in terms of IUCN, the organization that I am now leading. How are we going to do these marine protected areas in the high seas? Those marine protected areas do not belong to one country, will belong to all. And we have to have common rules for that. And we have to agree that this is going to work, and we have to put the financial resources, and we have to have the information sharing, we have to do environmental impact assessment, we have to, of course, know how to regulate genetic resources, and so on. So it is important. In IUCN, we are very, very happy to have been able to now support countries with the European project on capacity building. We already have the resources to support countries on understanding how this is going to happen. We also have another project with EKI funds from Germany, also to support countries on the designing of marine protected areas and how can this be done in a good way. And we are the secretary of the High Ambition Coalition that the Minister of Seychelles just mentioned. And besides that, I think that many of you know what is IUCN, so we bring to the table science, we have the legal expertise, and we are ready to support everybody so that we can do this job well, because it's not just any job, it's our own future as humankind.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that, Gretel. And I want to pick up on that second point about the financial mechanism with you, Torsten. So you are the founder of the Global Ocean Trust, you're senior advisor to ORA, and you are also an IUCN observer during the BBNJ process. You're co-chair of the Independent Expert Advisory Group on the treaty's financial mechanism, so you're the perfect person to talk about this. Can you explain to us a bit more what these mechanisms look like and how they'll differ from other mechanisms that we've seen perhaps in other environmental conventions like the Global Climate Fund or GEF, the Global Environment Fund?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you discussing such an important new process. And what makes the financial mechanism so interesting is really that it managed to combine a number of disparate ideas that came from a number of other processes. So, of course, we have assessed contributions, we have a budget. That's important because it funds the institutional side of the agreement. We also have a commitment of state parties to bring resources to bear. So that's an important component, but the core part of the finance mechanism is really there to allow developing states to be fully and equitably part of this process. And that means a number of things. So there's a voluntary trust fund just to allow attendance to be there. There is a new memorandum of understanding in negotiation with the Global Environment Facility. We made good progress during the recent PrepCom discussions. That will allow processes that the GEF Council raises, funds that come from the GEF allocation, to be allocated to the space. And then we have this particularly exciting new effort which is called the Special Fund. And the Special Fund is indeed special because it combines the opportunity for innovation, the opportunity for faster, better access, and the opportunity for private sector engagement. And so we are at an early stage to think about this process. We have a proposal from the Preparatory Commission for the way the special fund discussions will go between the first conference of parties and the second one through a specific ad hoc committee, but the core is really the substance. We need to use the special fund, because the special fund is the place where any future monies will end up in. That is the place where monies from the marine genetic resources regime will end up, from resource mobilization, from private sector, and to use that effectively through public-private partnerships in cooperation with other IFIs to really make this process work at the scale and speed and urgency that is required. So we have the components, now we need the commitment to make all of this work.
Thank you. Harriet, let me bring you in now. You're the director of the Nippon Foundation University of Edinburgh Ocean Voices program. So you focus on global ocean governance, and you have particular expertise in the 2/3 of the ocean that lie beyond a national jurisdiction. You also directly contributed to the development of BBNJ, working alongside expert networks like the IOC and the IUCN. So what for you are the building blocks that are now required to actually translate the treaty's commitments, this institutional framework, into something else, into the next stage, particularly when it comes to things like equity or to science?
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, colleagues. As my fellow panelists have just highlighted, the international institutional framework under the BBNJ agreement is critical for providing access to scientific information, financing, and the types of cooperation mechanisms, including through 5 institutional bodies, in addition to a COP, that are going to be needed. But I'd like to just point to 3 potential additional building blocks that offer opportunity to not only fully implement the obligations of the treaty, but to realize its broader opportunities for humanity and the ocean more broadly. And this really relates to having a wider enabling ecosystem around that treaty and its institutional aspects. So the first building block is going to be knowledge. The treaty calls for implementation that's based on scientific information, and not only scientific information, but also traditional knowledge. Now, understanding the ocean beyond national jurisdiction, providing that scientific base to underpin decisions about marine protected areas, to be able to assess environmental impacts, is going to require coordination and sharing of scientific knowledge through things like scientific networks that we've already seen play an important role in supporting the implementation conversations to date. The second building block that's going to be common across the treaty is going to be innovation. Now, when I say innovation, I mean innovation in terms of technological innovation, new approaches to understanding the ocean, to doing the types of marine genetic research that we know might inform conservation and potentially bring benefits that support the implementation of the treaty. But more broadly than that, development and deployment of technology, there's also the opportunity to innovate in how we think about ocean governance, and I'll pick up on that a bit more, I think, later. But the third building block that I wanted to mention today is courage. The fact that we're even here talking about this treaty is thanks to the vision and courage of some incredible individuals who have championed it and supported it through. Individuals in governments, in civil society, in academia, and in local communities. The courage that has led us to this point has in part been because it's influenced the narratives that we see around the ocean. The minister just now spoke about how the high seas connects us all. Now, I remember just 10 years ago when I started working on BBNJ, the predominant narrative was out of sight, out of mind. There was a cartoon from the New Yorker about, I don't know why I don't care about the bottom of the sea, but I don't. I think we've all seen that. I haven't seen that used in a presentation for a while because I think many people do care now. And as Karen Sack mentioned earlier, the treaty really signals a shift in the playing field from a conversation and narrative about extractivism to one about conservation. And in addition to conservation, one about equity when we think about the global commons. And one more narrative that we can look to for, I think, hope and opportunity is in the narrative around capacity building and tech transfer. Now, anyone who's been to Law of the Sea conferences in the past 10 years, like I have, knows that that narrative has often been one of donation, from A to B. In many of the sectors that you're in the rooms you're in, I'm sure it's much more progressive, but it's not always that way. Now, the treaty gives us a narrative around technology transfer and capacity building that explicitly refers to the development of technology and the achievement of long-lasting outcomes. And this gives us an opportunity for a narrative that connects us to the high seas in continuity, because the capacity we build to conserve the high seas does not live in the high seas. The benefits that come to the high seas can also come to shore. And that's an example of how continued courage in driving new narratives can continue to enable the ecosystem around implementation. Thank you.
Thank you, Harriet. Christian, you're going to pick up on that now. So just to situate, you're the CEO of Fauna and Flora, one of the world's oldest international conservation organizations. Prior to that, you had senior roles at the World Resources Institute, the World Economic Forum, where you led the Ocean Action Agenda and the Friends of Ocean Action platform. Now, Fauna and Flora is known for placing local communities and indigenous knowledge at the center of its conservation work. When we're talking about BBNJ, we're talking about these areas that are far beyond national jurisdiction, which might seem very distant from local realities. So where do you see the real opportunities within the treaty's architecture to make sure that these local and indigenous peoples, they're not just acknowledged, but they actively shape what's happening?
No, absolutely. I just want to come to that moment. I just want to make a comment about the incredible interventions that each of the ministers have made here. I rarely have been to an occasion like this where the speeches have all been so on point. And so I just want to congratulate you for the boldness, the courage to stand up and say the things you did. I heard words like connection, shared responsibility, community, community, community. You know, there's some powerful statements that are made, that it's a shared responsibility. And I think maybe coming to your question there is that, you know, I know what you said, Harriet, about, I think everyone doesn't feel it in the abstract. I still think there's quite a few people that think of the high seas in the abstraction, that it's 200 nautical miles offshore, but it's getting better without a doubt. But maybe I would argue, as a community-focused organization, that we are working with communities that are not thinking about it in the abstraction, which I think is the good news. Take, for example, some work that we've just started in the Arctic. You know, the Arctic has had centuries of people living there, deriving their well-being, their livelihoods from this area. And it's a changing ocean. And it's a changing ocean that they've seen well before the science has picked up on it. They've seen changes in seasonality. They've seen changes in species distribution. Again, and the science is playing catch up. So you have this incredible knowledge base that is there. And I think picking up on the point that you've made, Harriet, there is two amazing opportunities within the BBNJ, the environmental impact assessment and the scientific body. That knowledge, that indigenous and traditional knowledge, should be considered in that, not just as a consultation and tokenistic, but actually real evidence, and evidence to support that that's there. And maybe just the final thing I'll say is that equity is another really big word, and each of my colleagues here have mentioned this. And I think, again, here is something that we can get right in a range of functions. But we think about equity and the infrastructure that's going to be required in order to do that. So as we're leading into the first COP, as we're thinking about this equity dimension has to be central to this so we can get it right, that everyone benefits. If it's going to be a shared responsibility, then everyone needs to benefit.
Thanks, Christian. So as we're heading into this first COP, Gretel, tell us a bit more, if you will, about the High Ambition Coalition Secretariat. What's its purpose and what's it all about?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. First, let me refer to something that you said before. In my house, when they ask me, but what is the high seas? What is this thing, BBNJ? Because it might sound that it's far away, as you said, but honestly, if we don't take care of that half of the planet, then what we call national waters, or even the activities we do inland, will be affected. because as my indigenous people friends will say, everything is connected. So the best way perhaps to explain this is that if we don't take care of the high seas, we, humanity, will be in danger. And the benefits we get from our national waters might not be there. So that's why it's so essential, and that's why the High Ambition Coalition is important. And let me recognize that it's co-chaired by Seychelles, whose minister is here, Palau, and the European Union. And we in IUCN serve as the secretariat, bringing science, bringing knowledge, being a neutral partner that can facilitate. Having said that, we have today 48 state members as part of this coalition, which also give me the opportunity to congratulate Gabon, that is our newest member in the coalition, whose minister is also here. And why we put together this coalition, why it's important? First of all, we have to maintain the momentum. You know, now the ratification just happened in January. We need a group of countries, hopefully many, that will like to maintain this high in the agenda. Why? Because we need fast implementation, fair implementation, and decisions that are made based on science. So let's talk about, you know, equitable decisions and fairness. It's two words that are very important in this agreement. Benefit sharing. I mean, if you are a small country, like my country, Costa Rica, and you have huge countries with technology and knowledge, and they know what to do. But we in Costa Rica, we see a lot of, we have a lot of biodiversity, not to say national waters. Then we need the high seas to be in a good place. But we also want to be participant of what is happening there. So how do we achieve that where there is imbalance already? We want the decisions to be taken in the right way, in a fair way, in a way where everybody has something to say and everybody is heard in equal terms. So to have a coalition that can talk about these things, about how can we go to the ground, what Christian was saying, and actually, you know, understand that communities are important and that people based at the coastal levels are important and that BBNJ matters for them. How do we do that? Through implementation, to know how to do, and for that you need the countries on board. And it's not, and I want to be very clear here, it's not to replace the agreement, because the agreement has its mechanisms, but is to maintain the momentum at all times and to show good examples on how we're going to implement, to coordinate capacity building efforts. I mean, capacity building is needed in many countries. How do we coordinate this? How do we, instead of, you know, going to same countries 100 times or having a lot of organizations trying to do capacity building, how do we coordinate these efforts so that the efforts go to the ones that is most in need? All of this is what this coalition can do. Also, let me say about benefit sharing. It's sensitive. Of course, it's sensitive. And this agreement is about conservation, but it's also about sustainable use. And if we're going to talk about sustainable use, then since this is, you know, a common good of humanity, then if we're going to use it, needs to have some rules for benefit sharing. And that normally, even though it is in the remits of the agreement, that needs pre-negotiations, pre-discussions, and, you know, in countries that can lead. And we want, from small development states to big countries to middle countries, everybody on board. And that's why it is very important to have this coalition. And in IUCN, we're very committed to keep, you know, supporting this effort that is co-chaired by these three countries.
And of course, as we always say, you know, money makes the world go round. Torsten, I have to go back to you to talk about the financial piece. How best can we bring in the private sector to make sure that they feel ownership, that they feel involved when it comes to BBNJ and specifically the financing of the high seas MPAs?
Yes, thank you. And just take that statement about trying to manage, to monitor, to verify essentially half plus of the planet through one data infrastructure. That is an amazing opportunity for private sector participation, both in terms of technology partnership, but also in terms of implementation engagement. But it's also part of an opportunity for traditional ocean industries who are on this path of transition to see how their engagement can work together with this new framework, and how formats that the BBNJ encourages, such as public-private partnerships, can be used as a tool for that. So it's not just, but also direct funding into the special fund, which obviously can come from the private sector, but it's also that ability to find de-risking mechanisms around the special fund that will help that broader investment, that broader design, because one of the interesting debates is about scale. How can we work with scale better? And this is, again, where the private sector really comes in. So we're really talking about a rethinking of ocean economics, a rethinking of what ocean assets are about, the rethinking of that, how that works in the international context. And so it links the BBNJ process with a number of other international initiatives that are going on, whether that's the work of the Ocean Decade on science, whether it's the work of the Ocean Panel around national approaches, integrated approaches. And so these efficiencies that we're bringing by bringing the private sector into that discussion is really an open door for also larger institutional investors to rethink that discussion about materiality, which we have at the center of how financial institutions think about ocean and nature, and where the linkages are with more traditional clients and activities on the one hand, but then with that system of inclusive wealth of ocean assets on the other.
Thanks, Torsten. Harriet, I want to go back to you. You've been working in this process a long time, more than a decade, you were saying. Could you name for us the key voices and the values that have driven the process? And also, I'm curious to know how previously marginalized voices can be amplified in the future, as you were all saying. I mean, they're such a key part of this.
Thank you so much. As I mentioned earlier, and I think we've heard today a lot, that obviously states have been the crucial voices driving this process and making sure that it's happened. And what a tremendous achievement, particularly given the state of we currently see around the world. The people have come together around the common ocean is a tremendous achievement in itself. And supporting that has, of course, been important voices and knowledge from civil society, from academia, from science. But I want to hone on three particular groups of voices that the agreement actually particularly refers to that are really exciting. Now, the first is, and this is in fact a multitude of many different voices, Indigenous people and local communities. What an enormous multitude of different voices there. But in the course of the negotiation, hearing from representatives from Indigenous peoples and from local communities reinforced the reciprocal connection between humans and the sea and the responsibility. And we see that spirit of reciprocity really throughout the agreement. The agreement particularly provides for inputs from traditional knowledge, which is going to be an important way of keeping that value alive through implementation. A second, again, very large group of voices that the agreement provides for is women and girls. The agreement's framework for gender is one of the most progressive you'll see in any international treaty, particularly any international ocean treaty. Specific provisions for representation on committees, as well as particular provisions for gender-responsive approaches for capacity building, really shows that in thinking about the future of the high seas, it is very much a focus on everybody. Now, many people who have been in and around the BBNJ will often quip that there's been quite a lot of very wonderful women who have played a role in driving that forward. And it would be remiss of me not to take a moment to also recall the incredible contributions of Christina Gerdi to driving this forward, who, if you're not aware, is always with us when it comes to BBNJ, but sadly not anymore. And a third group of voices that Christina was always incredibly important in bringing forward is that of the next generation. You would never see Christina Gerdi, and if anyone doesn't know her, you could spot her a mile off because she had bright white hair and always a silk scarf with fish on it. She would always be surrounded by young scientists, young lawyers, whether you're in civil society, academia, government. She was always encouraging the next generation. And it's not just her. That spirit of bringing the next generation in was actually recalled in one of the most recent PrepCom discussions, where, in fact, the representative for CARICOM proposed that there was early career representation on the committees. Now, this, I would say, universal appreciation of the important role of future generations in carrying this forward is not just there on paper. We haven't just seen it in practice, but we're seeing it already moving forward in implementation. And one of the reasons why these voices and the values they bring is so important is, as it's already been mentioned today, ultimately it comes down to individuals and the relationships between individuals that will carry forward ocean conservation, whether it's hundreds of miles offshore or whether it's just getting our feet wet outside, and really thinking about how to support and bring forward that next generation and the values that they bring with them from all over the world and from all different sectors and disciplinary backgrounds is going to be really important.
Thanks, Harriet. We're going to turn to the questions in just a minute, but Christian, do you just want to, off the back of what Harriet said, talk a bit more about what Fauna and Flora is doing concretely and what you've seen?
Yeah, I just want to pick up on I think that was extremely well said, Harriet. I think, making that connection, and I think is important. I mean, it's a challenge for all of us to be the connective tissue on these, on these issues and make those connections. And think about this, as a continuum. What happens in the high seas does not stay in the high seas. And bear with me when I play out this just briefly. You have distant water fishing fleets. You have got opaque deals. You have got communities and those local voices and communities that have been cut out of these deals. And this is playing out real time. 300,000 artisanal fishers have lost their job in West Africa. That's not a projection, that's a hard data point. Then if you think about this and take this further, Ghana took the extraordinary measure in the more recent time, last year or earlier this year, basically said, enough is enough. We are tired of these fishing fleets coming into our waters, and we're going to ban bottom trawling from our terrestrial waters, okay? And we know the good news is that if we create marine protected areas in the high seas, it will benefit those inshore fishing fleets and will benefit those artisanal fishermen, those livelihoods, food security. You've heard the lot there. But if we allow these fishing agreements to continue to go ahead that are not benefiting those local people and having more equity and shared benefit, we will totally undermine the benefits of those high seas marine protected areas. So the challenge is as we go forward is to really think hard about how we can have this in a continuum and together, not treat the high seas in isolation. Connect them, connect this in a continuum. We have one ocean. It is connected. And I think there's a really important dimension there. And we have an amazing moment. And maybe just a final thing I say, just because I've been thinking about it and you mentioned it. This is truly an extraordinary opportunity in a world that is increasingly being divided. We have the ocean that brings us together. And what great moment and a legacy in history to come together across countries, across generations, across societies, et cetera, to really do something important for the planet.
It's great to hear that optimism. I'm afraid I have a bit of a cynical question, though, for you now. This question says, excuse me, in a system where profit maximization is the norm, what's the argument that will convince the private sector to deploy capital into the BBNJ fund, where returns on investment won't necessarily be monetary? Is it a CSR exercise? Torsten.
Sure. So, all funds are welcome, CSR, philanthropy, whatever it is. But my point is, this is an investable opportunity. Think of the special fund as the de-risking component of a much more complex financing structure. We are trying to monitor a very large part of the ocean. If we were to monitor a very large part of land, that's something that private sector invests in. Subsea cables are funded by the private sector. Satellites are funded private sector. We are now talking about use cases in the high seas that will not only allow us to run this kind of monitoring and management for conservation, but also to optimize operational usages. Just knowing more about specific wave heights allows us to help with shipping patterns. Just knowing how we can improve on the way invasive species are being transported in ballast water also allows us to improve on our ship design. So that a whole range of interactions between industry and the conservation efforts, and I think the opportunity is here for the private sector to engage in what is definitely a very large area and certainly a very innovative area.
Thank you. All right, next. Small island states were pivotal in negotiating BBNJ. How can we make sure their priorities do not get sidelined and they get the means they need to implement the treaty properly? Harriet?
I feel underqualified to address that question since I'm not from a small island developing state, but let me perhaps channel my many friends and colleagues who are and what I hear from them. I think the first thing is the opportunity of the mechanism of the Capacity Building and Technology Transfer Committee. And that committee, the architects of that committee, many of whom were from small island developing states, is really there not just to promote implementation, but some see it even as an accountability mechanism. And the hooks in the agreement to really use that to actually monitor what's happening with capacity building and tech transfer and have ways of evaluating the outcomes is something we have never seen before in this part of ocean governance. It's unprecedented anywhere else in the agreement as well for that committee to have such a strong doing function as well as just an advising function. And that's one place where really ensuring those interests and needs are there. The second place in the agreement which is there is, of course, the clearinghouse mechanism. And many of you will say, what is it? And you'll probably get different answers from everyone on this panel because it's still coming together. But whatever it is, it will be a platform to be very clear about needs, but more than that, to set the tone for saying, these are the partnerships that one invites, and these are the types of arrangements that one would like. And those are two mechanisms in the treaty that can ensure that those interests and narratives help to ensure that SIDS that were in many ways really crucial architects of this agreement and have led so far can indeed continue to lead and strengthen capacity of others by sharing experiences from the very long history of ocean stewardship in SIDS waters.
Yeah, maybe just to pick on that, I don't think there's really a question in my mind that large ocean states, as the minister from Mauritius pointed out, are going to play an active role. Can I take you back to 2013? You know, it was Palau and Monaco that were championing the idea of a sustainable development goal for the ocean. You know, and it was then Palau that rallied other of the ocean states that were there that said, look, we can drive this forward. And I think it's huge credit to the power of island states that came together with Monaco and others and really drove through, you know, something that was transformative. None of us could have imagined that really, you know, that we were going to have a standalone goal, and it has been, I would say, transformative in terms of how we have addressed and challenged ourselves as far as ocean protection stewardship is concerned. So, I guess I don't even want to question it. I think it's a rightful place, as large ocean states have a big stake in a thriving and healthy ocean, perhaps far greater than most states themselves.
I will add try again? Yeah, take Christian's.
You know, with all the respect to these states that are here, many in the first table, I like the word large ocean states, because that says all. No? Normally, you know, when I go to UN and to these big gatherings about the ocean, the ones who are leading are the small developing states. They're the ones who are taking the microphone and saying the things that we need to do. And many follow. I don't want to see these states as the ones who are in need. I want to see these states as the one that we can learn from, which is very different, and the ones that can lead and continue leading these efforts. I think that is very powerful to see how these states have come together in many occasions to defend the ocean, because the ocean is more than just the ocean. It's their home, it's their life, and they know how to manage. So I think that we have to turn the wheel and see these states as the one leading, as the ones leading, as the one who knows, as the one that we can learn from. And of course, recognize that we are talking here a business that is, you know, about benefit sharing and about equal opportunities and about being fair. So if we understand that, I think that then we will understand from what corner these states are coming from.
Gretel, thank you so much. I'm afraid we have to leave it there. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you very much. I'll let you take your seats. Go ahead. Yeah. All right. Well, after that incredible discussion, it's time now for all of you to give your input on looking ahead when it comes to BBNJ. So we're going to head into our workshop now. I'm going to explain to you how it works. This room is going to be divided into a series of workshops. There are 6 different topics that are relating to the implementation of the BBNJ Treaty. There'll be 2 tables per topic. Now, each table has already been assigned a moderator or 2 moderators per topic. So you can see all of them here on the screen. And after the workshop, and after the break, we'll have the moderators come on stage, 1 or 2, who will give us a wrap-up of your session. So we're really counting on you to participate in this session. So you've all been assigned to these 6 different topics. I'm just going to talk you through them now. The first topic is technology, data, and AI. So this one is led by Thibaut Bezacier and Muriel Lux. This is going to dive, obviously, into the technological aspects of the treaty's implementation, both in terms of the data required for the mapping of MPAs and in terms of surveillance for their eventual enforcement. The second one is impacts and adaptation of the private sector. This is led by Louise Heaps and Aaron Billman. This obviously will focus on the sectors that are most likely to be affected and the role they can be expected to play in the implementation of the agreement with other stakeholders. Our third topic, financing BBNJ. This is led by Farzaneh Shakiri and Yuvan Bijaher. This will question how both public and private finance can credibly be articulated to fund the implementation of the treaty, and looking at both the financing mechanisms we were talking about and other potential instruments that could come out of this coalition or partnership. The next is BBNJ in the Mediterranean. This is led by Giuseppe Di Carlo and Antoine Lafitte. This will really look at the articulation between BBNJ and existing frameworks that are already in place governing the Mediterranean, and maybe look at the readiness gaps and zoom in on the Mediterranean countries who haven't yet ratified the agreement and how to get on board. Then we have priority areas and science. This one's led by Claudia Kramers and Francis Staub. This will talk about the processes that are necessary to ensure that the designation of high seas MPAs is effectively informed by science, as we keep talking about today. And then we have interactions with international bodies. This is led by Mina Epps and Ashok Adisiem. This, of course, will talk about how the treaty is expected to navigate all the interactions with the International Seabed Authority, the International Maritime Organization, and the regional fisheries management organizations. So those are the 6 different topics. Your topic has already been assigned to your table. You have 40 minutes for this workshop. After that, there'll be a break, but 40 minutes start right now.